Hello, everyone. It's Silas from Sound Radio Politics. Today we've got a very special guest. If you live in Winchester, he's been your MP for 10 years, I believe. Is it 10 years?
That's right.
Yes, 10 years. So the way this is going to work, I'm going to ask you some local-based questions, then kind of go into more national-based questions. And we've also got a little section at the end. We've been asking students to come up with their own questions in social media, so we've got a couple of them. And we'll see how much time we've got. Okay, so to begin with, Steve, you've been an MP for 10 years. What do you think is your proudest achievement for Winchester as a constituency?
I think when you become an MP, you have to think about what matters to you and what matters to your constituency. Is to sort of set yourself some goals, I suppose, like any job. And I'd said from day one that the NHS and the local NHS was my priority. I've run a campaign called Priority NHS for many, many years. And the hospital here in Winchester is very much loved. It's a district general hospital. I want to see it have safe and sustainable services for the long term. And that means fighting for it inside government. So over many years I've done that, and relatively recently we've had some really big wins. So we had a very bad CQC report about the A&E at Winchester Hospital. It badly needed some investment around the way it treated young people who come into A&E, for instance, people with mental health conditions. So I managed to deliver £4 million for that, which was for the rebuild of A&E, which I got to open and cut the ribbon earlier this year. And now we have this rebuild hospitals project going on across the country, and Winchester Hospital is one of those. So we have seed funding in place, which is allowing us to design what services will look like at Winchester Hospital over the long term, and that will have funding available to us up to £500 million. So that is a big win for Winchester, and that's why I say at this election that you've got an experienced MP here, and that doesn't just come overnight. And I'm a government MP, so I'm fortunate that I get the ear of ministers, and that delivers for Winchester. So I'm really proud of that, and I want to keep doing that.
Thank you. That's very interesting. So I read the other day that the IFS said that funds for local government under the Tories would lead to further cuts in services like the NHS. So how would you kind of respond to that?
Well, local government doesn't fund the NHS for a start. Local government does some health services, so local government, top-tier local authorities, Hampshire County Council in our case, they do public health services. And the public health grant has been cut in recent years, but it's no good pretending that we came into office in 2010 with a golden economic legacy. We came in with an economic firestorm and the country on the brink of becoming Greece. So we had to close the deficit. We were spending more than we were bringing in as a country. Local government funding, yes, local government funding has been reduced over the last 10 years. And again, that's because of the economic crisis that we faced. But you've seen councils in Hampshire and councils more locally in Winchester, you've seen them make significant savings and change the way they deliver services and change the way they design services, and they've done that very successfully, thereby proving that there were plenty of efficiencies to be made. But I think we've got to a point now where the pip starts to squeak, and that's why the government has said that this is the end to austerity. We have, as a country and as a people, we've taken the pain and we've managed to close the deficit, and that's why we can now start investing again. Hence you see a huge rise in health spending, some £34 billion extra a year on the health budget that we're able to put in. That's why we've cancelled the corporation tax cut, because we decide that would be a nice thing to do, and supply side economics suggests it's a good thing to do. But actually, what is our priority? Well, our priority is the NHS, which is good because it's my priority too.
Okay, thank you. So your party is very much in this election anyway, the kind of excuse me, the Brexit party, not the Brexit party, but the party is going to deliver.
Not the Brexit party.
No, obviously not. But the party that's intent on getting Brexit done. Yeah. So what would obviously Winchester's a Remain constituency.
Is it?
Well, I mean, I think it voted 61% to Remain. But what would you have to say to people who voted to Remain? Why shouldn't they vote for Lib Dem?
Well, what would the Lib Dems, the Liberals, what would they say to people who voted Leave? Look, and this is my point, is that we cannot keep digging ourselves deeper and deeper into the craters of Leave or Remain. I voted Remain. I campaigned for Remain. Every single day I campaigned for Remain during the referendum campaign. But guess what? I lost. And in a democracy, you don't pick and choose the results that you like. So I take a very moderate position on Brexit, that I totally reject the extremes on offer at this election. So I totally reject the Nigel Farage view, which is that we should just walk away and pretend we never knew them. And I totally reject the sort of sneering, snobbish view of the Liberals, which is stop Brexit brackets because we didn't agree with it. And what that's really saying to people is, try again until you come up with the answer that we agree with. Get back in your box, because a lot of people voted for the first time at that referendum. Get back in your box and come back again when you've got the answer that we agree with. That's not how it works in a democracy. What are we teaching our children? Are we teaching our children this Christmas that, if you play Monopoly and someone else buys the house in Mayfair, you can turn the board up because you don't like the answer? That's not how it works. So my moderate Brexit position is simple, is that we should honour and respect the result of the referendum because we said we would, but we should leave with a deal, which is where I've put my neck on the line as an MP in recent months. And that is a moderate position. And it doesn't fit on a little diamond poster. It doesn't fit on a T-shirt, and it doesn't have a hashtag before it, but it just happens to be the right thing. Mm-hmm. And I think that we need to do that. And once we've done that and we've ratified the withdrawal agreement, which we will do if we get a majority of this election, we can then move on to talk about the future trading relationship with the other 26 countries that are members of the EU, our friends and partners in the EU and our biggest market, plus the 152 other countries who you never hear about, who are not members of the EU. That's the future relationship. And do you want an experienced MP who's in there arguing for a close aligned future relationship? I think you do. And then we can move on and talk about all the other things that matter, like health, like education, like higher education, like student funding, all those things that matter, which are at the moment being sidelined by Parliament, which is completely and utterly deadlocked and blocked. And as I go knocking doors, which I do all day, every day, other than when I'm seeing Sound Radio, what do people say to me whether they voted leave or remain or didn't vote at all? Will you guys please just make a decision? Will you move this country forward? And that seems to me like a pragmatic place.
Thank you. So as an MP who did originally vote to remain in the referendum, I heard that Boris Johnson announced a couple of weeks ago that he wouldn't, under any circumstance, extend the transition period that would happen after the deal's been agreed in Parliament. Do you? Is there any part of you that thinks that a trade deal won't be reached by the end of next year?
So, as ever with the Brexit conundrum, people talk about a deal. It's not a deal, it's a withdrawal agreement, it's the divorce. The divorce is merely about money, citizens' rights and the border in Ireland. That's all the withdrawal agreement bill is about, and that's first stage. The second stage is the future relationship, as I said, and that is what's the next stage. That's the big argument. People who think that Brexit is over when this goes through would be sorely mistaken, sadly. It's merely the end of the beginning, as someone said. So, do I think there'll be a fully formed free trade agreement in place by next Christmas? Not necessarily, but equally, I'm not pessimistic as the naysayers are that nothing can be done. People said Boris couldn't get a new Brexit withdrawal agreement, and he did. We're not Canada that took 7 years. We have had a relationship closely aligned to the EU for the past 44 years. So we are starting from that place. What I suspect you will see by the end of the transition period is I suspect you will see sensible sector deals in place to make sure that we don't fall off a cliff edge. So around the car industry in the West Midlands, for instance, which relies on the just-in-time supply chain. And then you will see a fully formed FTA thereafter. And you know what? As long as we leave safely, then I'm okay with that, because that's always been my bottom line, is that we need to leave safely and in a graduated way, which is what the transition period is all about. And the one ask business had of us was leave with a transition period. And we have. So we have a deal, and let's vote for it.
Thank you. That's very interesting. So let's go on to the NHS now. So what are your plans for the NHS nationally as the Conservative Party position? Well,
first and foremost, we're going to invest in it. So one thing the NHS doesn't need is less money. So it'll have the biggest budget in its history at the end of this investment period, and that's obviously important. But I'm a former health minister. It is about workforce, so it's about getting the right workforce in the right places. It's about reforming primary care, which I used to be the primary care minister. So at the moment, people have a far too much expectation of primary care. So people will write to me and they'll say, I can't see my GP. And I often say to them, could you tell me what, without wishing to pry, can you tell me what it is you wanted to see the GP about? And they're usually happy to tell me. So somebody says, I've got a sore shoulder and I had to wait 4 weeks to see the GP. You shouldn't be waiting 4 weeks. You shouldn't be seeing the GP. What we need to do in primary care is have a much more multidisciplinary approach. So there should be physiotherapists, there should be OTs, there should be pharmacists, there should be a wider team that work within primary care, and that is happening in lots and lots of different places. And that will then make sure that people are seen in a more timely way. And of course, what that will do, if you use the wider primary care network properly, is that will keep people out of the acute setting. So at the moment, we are terrible at measuring hypertension, otherwise known as high blood pressure. Hypertension can lead to all manner of acute illnesses, like stroke, for instance, and we don't pick that up. We don't pick it up. So we're not very good at preventing ill health, and we're not very good at dealing with ill health out in the community through primary care. And so a huge part of the investment that we put in place and the primary care changes that I put in place as minister, there's 5 new medical schools now in England. 2 of them are specifically training new GPs. There's a record number of GPs in training, and I think that's really, really important. So change the primary care landscape, get serious about prevention, child obesity, salt intake, measuring hypertension, making sure that the NHS is a preventative health service, and then investing in top line to make sure that when you do get to the acute sector, you've got the relevant people there, you've got the relevant skills there, and you've got the relevant technology to help you. So, that it's a big question. How do you deal with the future of the NHS? But you keep it free at the point of need, and you invest in it, and you make good, sound economic decisions that allow you to invest in it. And if the economy falls off a cliff, that ain't going to happen.
Okay, so this money you talk about, I've read that you want to put 39 or 33 billion pounds into the NHS. So where's this money going to come from?
Well, it's all costed in the manifesto, but actually that money was put in place in the budget because the long-term plan, which I was fortunate enough to be part of writing, that was what we did is we put the money in place, which comes from general taxation, because we have a growing economy and because we've managed to close that deficit, and then we decided to write a long-term plan as to how we were going to spend that money. So, the money, government doesn't have any money. The only money that government has is your money. It's the public's money, and we either get that from taxes or we get that from reducing spending in other areas. And what we have decided to do is the way we decided to cut the cake of government spending is to prioritise the NHS, and rightly so. I think that is the public's priority. It's certainly my constituents' priority, and as I think you've heard me say once or twice, it's
so finally on the NHS, it's been in the news a bit lately that Jeremy Corbyn's been saying that if you vote for Tories, they're going to sell the NHS to Donald Trump. So how would you respond to that?
Well, so Jeremy Corbyn says he's had access to secret government papers which show him this. I would suggest if Jeremy Corbyn's got access to secret government papers, it should be more of a concern to MI5 than it is to anybody who uses the health service. But point 2, it says very clearly in our manifesto, page 11, the NHS will not be on the table in any future trade deals, full stop. I think that's pretty clear. I think if you look at Labour's campaign during this general election, anti-Semitism, unfunded spending promises, the sheer chaos of Jeremy Corbyn, I'm not surprised he throws that dead cat on the table. At every general election, Labour come up with a scare story about the NHS. Tony Blair in 1997, we've got 24 hours to save the NHS. They do it every single time. People are not stupid. They see what they see before them.
Thank you. So on to policing. I hear that this is quite a big part of your manifesto. So in light of the London Bridge terror attack we saw sadly the other day, what are your plans to keep us safe?
So keeping communities safe is twofold, really, isn't it? Yes, it's about police numbers, and there is a pledge for 20,000 new police officers in the manifesto, but it's much, much more complex than that, of course. So it's about criminal justice reform, which is something I'm very passionate about, but it's also about intelligence-led policing, isn't it? So, the perpetrators of the attacks in London, they were known to the authorities. They were released under the early release scheme, which the Prime Minister has said that he wants to review and change the law around. But we should be rehabilitating offenders much better when they're in the secure state. And it's very different rehabilitating offenders who have got an extreme terrorist ideology than to reoffending somebody who is in there for assault or for for common theft, that is a very, very different thing. What we have at the moment is a prison estate that is way too high. There are far too many women in prison, most of whom are victims of domestic violence. We have far too many older prisoners who are no threat to society, who could be incarcerated in a very different way, and we have far too many people with mental health conditions in our prisons. So state failure is a big prison estate, and we have a big prison estate in this country right now. So, keeping communities safe, it's not just about bobbies on the beat, and that is important, but modern day policing is about intelligence, and it's about the much wider criminal justice piece. And on the criminal justice piece especially, I am a big proponent of criminal justice reform and prison reform, always have been. That's why I sit on the sort of centre left of my party, I suppose. But we're getting criminal justice policy wrong in this country right now. And Tony Blair was right when he said we should be tough on crime and tough on the causes of crime. And David Cameron was definitely right when he said we should understand a little more and condemn a little less.
Okay, so Boris Johnson, I think it was on the Andrew Marr programme, or a few days ago, he said that he confirmed that there are 74 people who had been jailed for terror who have now been released early. Who do you think's to blame for this?
Well, people can make their own mind up. I just don't think when people have been killed that we should. I'm not going to go pointing fingers as to who's to blame. But people can make their own mind up, and they can look back as a matter of record when the law was changed around the early release of offenders. What I think we should be doing now is being careful about how we use our language, and I think we should look forward to who those 74 are, and an individual, because people are individuals, and you can't just say that they're all the same. We should, case by case, individual by individual, decide whether that should be reviewed. And if we need to change the law in order for us to do that, then that's what we'll do. But we won't do that unless we've got a majority in the House of Commons.
Okay. Lots of people talk to me, and they say to me that climate change is a very big issue to them. Lots of students in the university. What steps, as the Conservative government, what would you take to tackle climate change?
Well, the people who speak to you are right. So climate change is the page 1 story of this election. Brexit is a page 7 story. Brexit is about a trading relationship with 26 other countries. Climate change and the climate emergency is the big story of this election, and to be fair, it is getting a lot of coverage, but I don't think it's getting enough coverage. The Conservative government, or the coalition government, and then the Conservative government have a really, really good record in this area. We have managed to reduce our carbon emissions faster than any other developed country while growing our economy. Because you hear the argument, well, you can't tackle climate change without wrecking your economy. I completely disagree. The whole green jobs agenda is huge, and we should be embracing that. So we've managed to do that. But I think it's threefold is the answer to the question. I think there is the big global leadership in climate change piece, and we as a country have been very strong on that. So at the moment you've got COP25 taking place. Next year in Glasgow we're going to have COP26, which is the conference of parties it's called, and we're going to be hosting that in Glasgow. That's about global leadership. And why is this country hosting that? Well, because we've shown global leadership on the world stage. We're the first country to legislate for net zero emissions. I think that's really important. Secondly, domestic. So, the Environment Bill, I spoke in second reading, the Environment Bill is really, really important. That's about ecology, it's about plastic-free campaigns, it's about all of the different things that we can do domestically, bearing in mind that we're a small country, and we are not the ones that are, we're not China and the US, frankly. So there are things that we can do domestically, and then there are things we can do locally. And there's a huge amount that goes on locally. So Winchester Action on Climate Change is a really hard-working organisation that give really good evidence-based facts to people about how they can change their lifestyles in order to have less impact on the planet. What do I do personally? Well, I have 2 children who are 9 and 12. They've flown once in the time that they've been alive. I don't like flying, and I choose not to fly. That's how I choose to reduce my impact on the environment. I'm not sure everybody else could say the same. And finally, on the local, because we are in a general election campaign right now, there's one party at this election that's putting a lot of leaflets through doors. They're also offering to plant a lot of trees. They might want to double the number of trees given the amount of nonsense they're putting through my constituents' boxes. It's not very green.
Thank you. So before we finish, I'm going to just I think we've got time for a couple of student questions. Right. So the first one, Justine, would you like to read them? Or do you want?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Let's do this. Okay. So, how will you increase public confidence in those who are elected to represent the constituency by ensuring residents from all backgrounds are heard and actions to issues raised are undertaken when necessary?
By referring you to my record, I have represented the area for 10 years, and the strength bit of representing a constituency is that I have no idea how either of you vote, and I don't care. At the end of the day, if I'm your MP, I'm your MP, and that's the same for the 75 other thousand people that I represent. And you have to represent people however they vote, and I've done that for 10 years. And the best way that we can deal with public trust in politicians is by sticking to our promises. And we've been criticising our manifesto for it not being ambitious enough. I would much rather under-promise and over-deliver than promise a load of stuff which we can't do, and that just leads to more cynicism, especially among young people who think, well, why should we bother?
How can we trust the Conservatives to protect workers' rights in their Brexit deal?
Because we already have better workers' rights than most of other European countries. And it's a bit like the question you asked me about the NHS and this nonsense about NHS privatisation and trade deals. Why would we want to do that? We wouldn't get out alive if we tried to privatise the NHS. If we wanted to seriously impact on workers' rights and take away workers' rights, we've been in government for 10 years. Why wouldn't we have done it already? Because it's not good sense. Yes, you have to look after the almighty dollar, because you have to have a strong economy to fund the public services, but you also got to look after the people who work in them, because quality of life is as important as quality of money. And so, if a Conservative government wanted to do that, we'd have done it already. And, the Brexit deal should protect and enhance workers and environmental rights. And lots of Labour MPs say they didn't vote for the Brexit deal because it would have negatively impacted on workers' rights. Frankly, if the Brexit deal had been badged with the Labour Party logo and Jeremy Corbyn's face, Labour MPs would probably have found a reason not to vote for it because it was raining on Tuesday. So I don't buy that.
Thank you very much. I think that's all we've got time for.
You're welcome.
Thank you.